This is a program from the end of chapter 10. It's programming exercise 15, and it is a lottery. So the basic premise here is that there's a state lottery, and once a week, 5 numbers between 1 and 40 are drawn. If a player gets all those numbers, if he guesses them correctly, he wins. So we're to generate the random lotto number in an array, store it in an array, sort the array of lotto numbers, then ask the user to input his 5 guesses and store those in an array. Then compare the two arrays to see if the user wins the lottery, which means all 5 numbers have to match. So I have already built the program. Everything is here, but we're going to go through and take a look at it because there are a couple of things that are new that you might not have seen before. I will tell you, though, that as far as sorts and searches go, that we don't memorize all of them. What we do is look them up when we need to use them. I could write a bubble sort. I could write a sequential search. Those are fairly straightforward and easy, and I've done them a number of times. When it comes to some of the other more sophisticated sorts, I have to look up the algorithm, and the same is true for a lot of the searches. This particular program asked us to do a selection sort and a sequential search where needed. So that's what we're going to look at. Also, we're going to look at the use of random and the time functions. So my header files here, I have IOStream and IOManip, which you're familiar with, but then I also have the C standard library header file because it contains the random function, and then the C time file, which contains the time function. And then my variable, or my function declarations here, my prototype statements, I have a void get lotto where I'm passing an array. I have a Boolean number in list to check to see if the number is already in the list because these numbers are inclusive 1 to 40 and they can only appear once in both the lotto number and only once when the customer selects. Then I'm going to sort the lotto numbers. Then I have to get the customer's 5 numbers and store them in an array. And then I've got to check the lotto number against the customer number, which involves 2 arrays. And then I want to print the customer's numbers out, as well as print the lottery numbers out. So I have 2 arrays, the lotto number and the customer number, both of which have 5 elements. So the first thing we do is to get the lotto number, and then we sort it. Then we're going to get the customer's number and then check with the Boolean functions to see if you win or you lose, and then print out the correct lotto numbers. So here's the get lotto number. It is while count is less than 5 because we have 5 numbers, so 0 through 4 would give us our 5 numbers. We're using the random function, which returns a random positive integer from 0 to a large value every time it's called, but we want to scale that back so that the range we have is between 1 and 40, and you use the mod operator in addition to get that done. So in our case, we're going to mod by 40 and add 1. The time function is often used to seed the random number generator because it's not very random actually. If you just use the random call, it usually pulls the same start number every time, so it isn't random, and we have to have some way to start it with a random number. Time 0 returns the number of seconds from the system clock. So we're going to use that as the seed to generate a random number. So here is where I'm generating the number. The call to random plus time, the seconds at that given moment, modded by 40 plus 1. Then I've got to check to see if the number's already been placed in the list. So my if statement is a call to the function number and list where I'm passing the array and the number. And if it is, then I'm not going to be able to store it. But if it's not, if it's true, then I'm going to come down and put the number in the list and add 1 to count. So let's go down to number and list so you can see that particular search. Here it is. It's a Boolean function returning true or false where the array and the number are passed in. It starts at 0, less than 5 because I have 5 elements in my list. And I'm just checking against, I'm starting with the first element in the array, and I'm checking to see if the current number is actually already there. If it is, it returns true. If it's not, it returns false. And if you recall up here, the question is, if not number and list, then you're actually going to store the number. See, if not number and list. So if it returns a true, then not true is false, which means it skips the block of code. If it returns a false, then not false is true, and it actually puts the number into the array. And then the next function that we see here is to sort it. So once we've got our array, we're sorting the array, and this is a selection sort. And a selection sort means that you're going to select the smallest item in the list and move it to the top of the list or the front of the list. Then you reduce the number of elements you're looking at, and you find the next smallest number and bring it to the front of the list. Not the front, the second element in the list, and so on. So this involves manipulating a lot of indices. So the first thing up at the top here, I've got several integer declarations for my different indices that I'm using. IND, MIND, and small IND, and then a temp for the actual swapping process. So I've started the outer loop with the IND index 0 to 5 minus 1. It's always 1 minus the number of elements you have. A lot of times the 5 would be a variable minus 1. I could have put 4, but it just makes more sense because the algorithm states n minus 1, and then add 1 to the indices. Then I'm setting small index as the first index in this case, so it's 0. Then I've got an inner loop. Remember that this inner loop is going to process fully before the outer loop ever steps again. So now I'm starting with M index, which is index plus 1. Well, on the first pass, that's a 1. And it's checking to see if the number that's currently the smallest number, which is the first element in the array, if that number is greater than the list, the element next to it, because remember this is 1 and this is a 0, so I'm looking at items 0 and 1 in this case. Then we're going to swap the indexes out, and it's going to keep stepping through there. Only if that if is true will it swap the index on the, but it's going to pass through it on the first pass from 1 to 4. Then it comes back and it does the swap, because at that point you found the smallest number in the element and you're putting it in the first position of the array. When it comes back up here, IND is 1, so when we get down here, MIND is going to be 2. And now I'm going from 2 to 4, so I've eliminated the first position in the array. Again, it's going to look for the smallest element. Once it's found it, it's going to put it into the array, and so on. So the third pass, IND is 3, IND plus 1 is 4. So we're looking at elements 3 and 4 next to each other, and that's the way a selection sort works. But again, I would just copy and paste the algorithm or the code and then edit it. Okay, so we've sorted our lotto numbers, and back up here in main, after sort we get the customer number. So we come down to the code for the function get customer number, where the user's prompted for 5 integers between 1 and 40 inclusive, meaning 1 through 40. Enter the first number, then come into the loop and continue entering. But we do have to check to see if the number is in the list. So again, if not number in list, and number is greater than or equal to 1, and number is less than 41. So that actually takes care of all of the elements. The number is within the range 1 through 40, and it's not already in the list. If that's true, then the number they input goes into the array. But if it's not between 1 and 40, then the number has to be between 1 and 40, select another. Or if it is not in the list, it's already selected, select a number, add another number, enter another number. So that actually lets the customer put in their numbers. Back up to main, and the next thing that we do is to check to see if you won the lotto. So here's the call, which is a true false, and I'm passing the lotto number array and the customer number array, and of course if they all match you would win, but that never happens. So you're going to lose most of the time. And when we go down to check the lotto, it actually relies on number and list as well. Here are the 2 arrays being passed in. I'm stepping through the elements of the array with index, but I'm making a call to num and list because I've got to compare them, and that's what this does. And since I needed this twice, once when I was first putting the numbers into the lotto number list to check that I didn't have a duplicate, and now I need it again because I do need to check if they're the same. So this function is called in 2 different places. And of course, as soon as it returns from doing this sequential search, you would know whether or not you won or lost, but you aren't going to win. In fact, I've run this numerous times, and I think I've only had two numbers that were the same twice, and that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and build it, although I'm pretty sure it's good. And then I'm going to run it so you can see what it looks like. All right, enter 5 different integers between 1 and 40. So I'll do it correctly the first time. Put 5 numbers in that meet the criteria. And I lose because the correct numbers that the computer generated are 2, 10, 15, 21, 28. Now I'm going to do it again, but I'm not going to meet the conditions correctly. So I'm going to run it again. And this time we'll enter 99. Oh, no, the number has to be between 1 and 40, so select another number. Again, too big. So you lose because it didn't have any matches, and it actually doesn't let me do all 5 numbers on that because it's not coming back up to the top of the loop. But you get the idea. And of course, the most important thing here is sorting and searching the array, and those are the functions: sort lotto number, check lotto number, and get number and list. Those are the 3 functions that contain that code.